Well, good morning, everyone. Considering that Professor Michael von Princeton is teaching mainly the Russian literacy theory, I will try in this demo to introduce you the basic concept of Russian literacy theory, the defamiliarization. The defamiliarization could be expanded easily with an example in our daily life. We may not be, the professional art critics, but when we visit an gallery, the first rules we use to evaluate art, it's quite simple, right? Whether the artworks catch our eye, whether it gives us a sense of freshness. For example, in high school art class, we all have studied a painting. The Father by Lord Zhongli. It's not a surreal painting, it's quite realistic, right? But it does capture our attention, with the emphasis on the father's wrinkles, the emphasis on the dirt under his fingernails, and so on. Details that we are likely to overlook in our daily lives. From these strong impressions, it's clear that, oh, this is art. In a very crude sense, this is an example of the defamiliarization. Rather surprisingly, the very intuitive argument that a sense of freshness is a very late criterion in the history. For example, in the Middle Ages, the criterion for art was not freshness, but the conformity of the picture to the divine order and the traditional conventions. So if we were to visit any of the art museums, we would, consider these medieval paintings are boring. At the Uvitz galleries, for example, many visitors just skip these medieval paintings and just walk away. So we could say that the focus on freshness is actually a very modern definition of art. It was only in the 20th century that the analysis of freshness was gradually become a system. Viktor Shevsky's art as techniques, published in 1917, formally introduced the concept of defamiliarization. It's worth noting that the concept of defamiliarization is central to Russian formalism, which is in turn is the origin of various literary theories nowadays. So a full understanding of defamiliarization is quite helpful for understanding of almost every series nowadays. The above is all historical backgrounds and context, so let us briefly skim this tad by Viktor Shevsky, while in-depth analysis and interpretation are what the Professor Michael would do afterward. Many people will misunderstand art as techniques as a book, but in fact it is the first chapter of a book series of posts. In Art as Techniques, Viktor Shevsky's arguments have two parts. Firstly, Viktor Shevsky criticized the automation. He says that when perceptions become habitual, it becomes unconsciously automatic. This is quite easy to understand in our daily life. For example, when we are too familiar with the shop downstairs, we know exactly where each item is and we can easily get what we want. At this point, we don't really need to look at each item carefully. For business, this is fine because we don't need to taste the beauty of the goods, right? But for arts or for literature, it could be a disaster. When we say Mona Lisa, for example, we immediately think of the smell of Mona Lisa. And when we look at the painting with these strong impressions, it is difficult to really notice the painting as a whole. You may just stare at the corners of the Mona Lisa's mouth, right? But contrary to this kind of common sense, it's the context of Mona Lisa that is the focus of the uh, art historians' research nowadays. So the automations allowed us to remember the features of the artwork but obscure the art itself. This may be a frustrating experience for us. Viktor Shevsky therefore proposed defamiliarization as a solution to this problem. It's not possible to overcome automatic through the teacher's lectures in the classroom, right? It is not simply a question of the audience. In Viktor Shevsky's view, art itself should actively challenge the viewer's senses. The example of the shop remains. If the shopkeepers rearrange the goods every day, then the customers had to make an effort to find what they want. Of course, this is not good for business. But Viktor Shevsky says art exists that one may recover the sensation of life, to make one feel things, to make the stone stony. His strategy is to impart the sensation of the scenes as they are perceived and not they are known. The technique of art is to make the objects unfamiliar. Victor Schottky's emphasized the shift from an intellectual perspective to a perceptual one. That's to say, not to learn that the Mona Lisa is a famous painting, not this kind of knowledge, but the technique of work of art itself bring you astonishment. Since we are modern, it's quite difficult to be shocked by the Mona Lisa. But considering that in the 16th century, the Europeans did not have much experience as we do of these painting techniques, the Mona Lisa at that time could be a perfect example of defamiliarization, since the Mona Lisa made full use of the technique perspective. Then, how does defamiliarization as a theory and principle to find its own way into Russian literature? I'm sure the Professor Michael will give you a fascinating explanation later. So this is the end of my introduction, and thank you for watching. Thank you so much.